Killers of the Flower Moon, Martin Scorsese's 3.5-hour epic, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, is a romance, a western, a whodunit, and a lesson in the bloody history of the Osage murders of the 1920s. There's a scene in Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon when the screen fills with men toiling in what looks like a lake of fire. Inky silhouettes in a red-orange void, they look like Boschian imps, but these are ordinary men in a hell of human making. It's a rightly apocalyptic image for this cruel and baroque American story of love, murder, greed, and unspeakable betrayal in 1920s Indian country, a true crime epic that Scorsese, with grace, sorrow, and sublime filmmaking clarity, has turned into a requiem for the country. This may seem like strange territory for Scorsese, with his New York wise guys and street corners. From the Roman Empire in The Last Temptation of Christ to 1930s Tibet in Kundun, and then home again for the 1980s and 90s of The Wolf of Wall Street. During his wanderings, Scorsese has never strayed far from Hollywood, or rather its filmmaking foundations, though principally by doing what all great artists do, by reinvigorating and reinventing forms, and making them his own. This may seem like strange territory for Scorsese, with his New York wise guys and street corners. Yet he has always ranged wide and far in his work, from the Roman Empire in The Last Temptation of Christ to 1930s Tibet in Kundun, and then home again for the 1980s and 90s of The Wolf of Wall Street. Throughout, Scorsese has also reminded you that there are many ways to tell stories, including about evil. This one, set largely on the Osage Reservation in northern Oklahoma, revisits a history of violence as fraught and bloody as that of the United States itself. The crimes it primarily recounts trace back to 1921. There were earlier killings, and involved the murder of several dozen Osage. There may have been many more victims. Some were shot, others were blown up, while still others died from an enigmatic wasting illness, though were likely poisoned. The era is often referred to as the Osage Reign of Terror, an odd description that wrongly implies the Osage were somehow responsible for the horrors perpetrated on them. Part of the pleasure, and for lack of a better word, magic of Scorsese's work is how both the entirety of his filmmaking and his subjects are of an expressive piece when he's in his groove. Scorsese once said of a John Cassavetes film, "That's what Scorsese imitators badly miss when they try to crib from him." When Henry Hill and his girlfriend stroll into the Copacabana during the famous long-taken Goodfellas, a blissed-out interlude in which the characters, camera, and music flow together, Scorsese isn't showboating. He is, rather, using the full force of his technique to capture a specific moment in time in all its delirium and voluptuousness. After Ernest and Molly marry, he moves into her house, where she lives with her ailing mother, Lizzie Q. Tantu Cardinal, and her sister Anna, a vibrant Cara Jade Myers, a sybarite with a pistol in her handbag. The story's romance is warmly inviting, and DiCaprio and Gladstone work beautifully together, their different performance styles. Ernest is physically demonstrative while Molly is reserved, creating a contrapuntal whole. You believe in these characters, but also, crucially, you believe them as a couple and in the tenderness of their love. You watch them settle into each other's bodies in bed, and at other times, lean into each other so that their foreheads touch, as if to silently share their thoughts. Scorsese, who shares screenplay credit with Eric Roth, has given this story both scale and intimacy. This is a bigger-than-life movie with sweeping vistas and soaring camera work, but one that incessantly shifts from bright, wide-open spaces to interiors as shadowy as their inhabitants. First among the richly populated cast is Ernest Burkhart, Leonardo DiCaprio, a war veteran who, when he steps off a steam locomotive and onto a crowded train platform in Fairfax, Oklahoma, plunges into a Hobbesian churn of humanity. All around him, people are moving, shouting, some are fighting. It's exciting and disorienting, and Ernest looks at once energized and more than a little bewildered, like a child set adrift in a crowd of strangers. Scorsese and Roth have also thinned the larger history that Gran sketches in, leaving just enough of the Osage's catastrophic relations with the United States to connect the present to the past, and to give some backdrop to the guardianship system the government instituted to control both tribal members and the wealth from their mineral rights. That history emerges elliptically throughout the movie in different narrative forms, including in Hale's descriptions of the Osage, via an illustrated book, during a tribal meeting, and on a radio program, each a reminder that history belongs to those who tell it. For his telling, Scorsese has drawn on assorted genres. The movie is at once a romance, a western, a domestic drama, a whodunit, and, finally, a police procedural that effortlessly mix, ebb, and flow. It's an energetic and unexpected amalgam, but partly because Scorsese uses genre to his ends rather than conforming to its conventions, the overall effect can be destabilizing. He's not boxed in by obvious narrative cues, and neither are you. That means that you're never sure where the story is headed or why, which is enjoyable and adds to the overall mystery. Yet, as the murders continue to mount, and the story grows ever more outrageous and horrifying, this destabilization can also feel ominous, even dangerous. Ernest tethers you to the story and its early buzz and confusion, and you discover this new world and its people largely through him. He soon sets himself up as a chauffeur for hire in Fairfax, a boomtown that's still shaking off the dust of the 19th century. There, Scorsese makes an entire social order come alive. He has an ethnographer's eye, as roadsters race past horses and buggies on the main dirt strip, and a white salesman on bended knee implores a native family to buy another luxury automobile. It's amid this tumult that Ernest meets Molly Kyle, Lily Gladstone, wonderful, an Osage woman with watchful eyes and a colorful blanket that she drapes over her shoulders like a royal mantle. They flirt and soon weed. The movie is based on David Gran's 2017 book, Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders and the Birth of the FBI, a nonfiction account of how, in the early 20th century, greedy whites preyed on the newly oil-rich tribe. The book is informative, stark, and relentlessly grim. The depravity of some of the crimes can be shocking. In adapting it, Scorsese and Roth have more or less jettisoned the second half of Gran's subtitle. There's little in the movie about the Federal Bureau of Investigation, its foundational years, or its newly appointed young director, J. Edgar Hoover. The story may horrify you, but it's hard not to laugh when DiCaprio meets his first Fed, portrayed by the reliably good Jess Plemons, given that DiCaprio played Hoover in J. Edgar. Here, there's emotion in every camera move, gesture, as well as in the crowds that by turns embrace and threaten. It's also in the pointed repeat of a possessive adjective. When Ernest is first being taken to Hale's house, he asks the Osage driver, Henry Roan, William Bellow, whose land this is. Henry's answer, my land, echoes what Molly says when Ernest asks her what color her skin is, my color, each an assertion of sovereignty that becomes more meaningful as one after another Osage is murdered. It's not for nothing that much later, when Hale dresses down Ernest, Scorsese shoots them on a black and white checkered floor, underscoring their respective roles as king and pawn. After I saw Killers of the Flower Moon a second time, I kept flashing on Goodfellas and Kundun, because the intimacy and horror of this new movie's violence reminded me of those earlier films. The violence here has a specific history, but also a different texture and depth. It seeps into this movie like the crude oil that both liberates and condemns the Osage. If you enjoyed from this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.